Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Can some, I'm not getting a, can someone give me can you hear? Okay, all right. Okay, good morning. It's my pleasure today to introduce Reverend Eido Phoebe Reinhart. She was ordained by and received a transmission from Reverend Shohaku Okumura Roshi. She practiced in two 3-month angos in Japan in 2012 and 2016. And she is recognized by Soto Shu as an official missionary here in the USA. She retired in 2020 after working for 50 years as a physical therapist. She lives in Minneapolis and has 2 adult sons and 2 granddaughters. And thank you so much, Eido, for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
First, can you hear me?
Yeah, but we can't see you. Is that correct?
Well, let's see here.
There you
Oh,
go.
there I am.
Now
There
I
I
can see and hear you.
am. Okay. Um, Now how can I change my screen so I'm not just looking at Dokai all the time?
Well,
Can,
I'm glad you were able to do that.
no, I can't. I just see
Oh,
Dokai. Uh,
oh,
anyway, that's okay.
I think can you just change it to gallery view? Can you do that, Eido?
Oh, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay. First of all, I just want to share with you um, a Seiza bench that I recently discovered. Um, and it's the only one I've ever been able to use. That's why I want others to know about it in case you have a similar situation. I have had 2 knee replacements, and I can't sit in Seiza even with most Seiza benches, but this one I can, and it's adjustable in height, so you can make it higher, you can make it lower by adjusting the Velcro here. And my own situation is that it's difficult for me to sit in a sitting posture. And if I sit long periods in a chair, my legs swell up. So this is uh, uh, something new and exciting that I wanted to share with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And you can get it from Dharma Crafts or Amazon, actually. Um, but today, I've chosen to talk about my spiritual journey, and I'm calling it my spiritual journey to all is one and one is all. And before I get into the details of that, there are some important words and phrases that I want to talk about that are relevant. And one of them is mysticism. So part of what I want to talk about is, besides my journey, is my understanding that the mystics of most traditions have some similar experience and understanding of reality. And one of the things that I want to share with you, I just dropped some books, is The Way of Selflessness, a practical guide to enlightenment based on the teachings of the world's great mystics. And basically what this is about is talking about the similarities in experience and practices of enlightened teachers in many different traditions. And the reason it's called The Way of Selflessness is that is the primary thing that this author thinks that all these traditions have in common, that they're practicing selflessness. I'll say more about that in a bit. Most people would not classify Zen or Buddhism as a mystical religion, and that's partly because of the reputation that mysticism has as being kind of a magical thing with, magical powers and visions and things like that. And those things are described by some mystics, but they're rare. I looked up the definition of mysticism and want to share that with you and see if it resonates with any of you. The belief that one can directly access spiritual truth, God, or ultimate reality through a subjective experience like intuition or insight. It can also refer to mystical spiritual experience, but its meaning is not restricted to these rare events. It is a method of thought, not a doctrine. A common core is an experience of unity that in an extroverted mysticism includes the unifying perception that all is one and everything shared in inner subjectivity. The belief that one can know spiritual truths of life and the universe that are beyond the intellect by being absorbed into the deity or ultimate reality through contemplation and self-surrender. There is a spectrum in most religions from fundamentalism to mysticism. In the Judaism, the Kabbalah is a writing of mystics. I had it here and I was going to show you, but I can't find it now. And in Islam, mysticism is manifested by the Sufis. Many see Jesus as a mystic, and there is a tradition of mysticism in the practice of the Desert Fathers of the 4th century. Now, these are Christian monks who went off into the desert and lived as hermits. And primarily, I would say primarily to pray. And part of the result of that is that even though they were hermits and living far away, they became very wise, and many people came to talk to them like masters and ask them questions. And into this day, we still talk about the things that they said and did. And I'd like to give you a little example. So a brother came to Abbot Pastor and said, "Many distracting thoughts come into my mind, and I am in danger because of them." The elder thrust him into the open air and said, "Open up your garments about your chest and catch the wind in them." "What?" he replied, "This I cannot do." "No," the elder said to him, "if you cannot catch the wind, neither can you prevent distracting thoughts from coming into your head. Your job is just to say no to them." Very simple, and probably it sounds familiar. So a certain philosopher asked St. Anthony, "Father, how can you be so happy when you are deprived of the consolation of books?" And Anthony replied, "My book, O philosopher, is the nature of created things. And any time I want to read the words of God, the book is before me. All I have to do is open my eyes and look." Some other words that are maybe sort of common and comfortable for me, having been formed as a Christian, are and are not used a lot in Buddhism, but I think are still relevant. Devotion, reverence, respect. For instance, when we light a candle and bow and we go into the zendo, we were showing sort of respect and acknowledgement and gratitude to our ancestors. Another couple of words that can be tricky are faith and belief. some of us think that faith is the same as belief, and belief can be understood simply as, some people would say it's believing something that is unbelievable. But I think there's a difference between faith and belief, and that faith has its place also in our practice. Faith is trust that is verified by experience. A dictionary definition says complete trust in someone, something, or concept, or in our case, it can be in a practice. We have faith in this practice. Prayer. So we don't use that word much in our practice, but before I became practicing Buddhist, I explored prayer a lot, and there are many different kinds of prayer. And what I ended up with was a prayer that is sometimes called the practice of the presence of God. And the purpose of which is just to be receptive, surrender to the will of God, as in let thy will be done instead of mine. In other words, letting go of self so that I can be filled with God's will. And that is still with the understanding that I'm praying to a God that is outside of myself. And in my experience, it's gradually evolved to realizing that God was not outside myself, and that I was in God, and God was in me, and God was in everything. And so the prayer was kind of like a recognition of that, a practice of that, of realizing, actualizing and manifesting that, and being expressing gratitude for that. So in our Christian practice, we would often use the word surrender. In Buddhist, we often say letting go, like letting go of thoughts, or as Okumura Roshi would say, opening the hand of thought. You might be familiar with that phrase. And just a little interesting aside about that. That book, this one was edited in 2004, but it was previously edited in 1993. And originally, excuse me, that's the 1993 version. This is the 1973 version, which was written by Shohaku's teacher, Uchiyama Roshi, and translated into English in 1973. And I discovered it in the mid-70s and have had it ever since. And I didn't, I met Shohaku Okumura decades later, probably 20 years later, and even knew him for a few years before I realized that this was his teacher. And that I had kept this book, and it had influenced me from a very young age. I was in my 20s. That was kind of a precious discovery. So another kind of realization I came to is that there is only one reality, and that it is oneness. And this is what the Buddha awakened to, and what we are called to awaken to. I think it is also what these mystics of various traditions also experience, but may describe in a different way. There are multiple paths to this realization, but the result is the same: realization or awakening. Awakening to what? Awakening to we are one. And in this book, Radical Optimism, Rooting Ourselves in Reality, this was written by a Christian Beatrice Brutto, if anyone knows her. But anyway, she had a kind of an interesting illustration of sometimes we talk about this in terms of the big self and the little self, and the big self is sort of like ultimate reality, and the individual is about relative reality. And she did these diagrams, and she called it the mystical rose. And it's about this 1, 2, 3, 4, all have different meanings. The first one is just nothing, it's just a flower. But she's saying this is to illustrate this rose, this mystical rose is like the big self. And all these petals overlap, but we don't notice that. And we find ourselves out on the edge of these little individual petals as the little individual self, seeing reality from that point of view and thinking that that's all there is, and thinking that we are separate selves, and not noticing or recognizing this connection that we have. And so these other pictures are showing that, like, this overlap, and this one shows it overlapping in different directions. This one reminds me a little bit of the image that Shohaku sometimes used, was Indra's net, that each little knot in the net is an individual, but if you pull on that, you move the whole net, and that's how we are interrelated. But we often don't know that or don't realize that. But I think that we can actually. I think part of our practice is to refine our intuition. I think there are things that we know intuitively, and our practice can help deepen that and refine that so that we can see more clearly. So another little thing about mysticism, you may have heard this. Theologians may argue about ideas and beliefs, but mystics of any religion speak the same language. And so when we read them, we recognize sort of a universal truth that they are have discovered. Another important phrase to me is, let's see. Well, it was coined by Joshua Sasaki Roshi, a Rinzai priest who I practiced with in 1980. And in his book, Buddha is the Center of Gravity, he says, there is no God, but he or she is always with you. And Brad Warner also used this as a title of one of his books, which I haven't read. But another phrase you may have heard is that which you are seeking is causing you to seek. We feel dissatisfied, like something is missing, but we don't know what it is. Yet our tuition sends us on a journey which sometimes feels like returning home. We have a vague memory of that home and a desire to return. When I was a Christian and was exploring the path of contemplation, one of my favorite Psalms was Psalm 42, which says, as a doe longs for running streams, so longs my soul for you, my God. So we have this existential longing, and how does it get there? I mean, it almost is that as if it is already informing us that we know there is something to seek. And so it nags us, and we listen occasionally, and occasionally we follow. And that leads to a spiritual journey, and probably a spiritual path and spiritual practice, which eventually leads us to realize that we are one. It's very simple. But can we really know that? and not just believe it. So here again is a difference between sort of belief, faith, and knowing. I think we can know, but it requires refining our practice and refining our intuition. So Dogen Zenji said, all sentient beings without exception are the Buddha nature. And Eihei Dogen in the Showa Genzo Busho, he said that. Anyway, the difference between all sentient beings are Buddha nature and all beings have Buddha nature is one of the defining teachers of the Soto Shu school. So if all sentient beings are Buddha nature, then everything that exists is an expression of Buddha nature, including us. Buddha nature is the reality of being awake, not the potential to be awake. So practice does not lead to awakening. There is only the deepening of this realization with practice, because we are already Buddha nature. So, and Dogen also said in relation to this, practice and enlightenment are one. There's no difference. So our practice is actually the sort of the realization, the actualization, and the manifesting of that. And somewhere I read, that Dogen had this question, and many had the question, if we already are, why do we practice? And I can't remember where I read this, but an interesting statement from a Buddhist was that we do it to express our devotion and gratitude. And that's kind of a foreign idea, but to me, it also makes sense that we're sort of, we're not doing it to get something. We're doing it to realize it, to acknowledge it, to be grateful for it. And you might say to surrender to it. So just to back up, all these things, let's see, these ideas or understandings are the result of my personal path of practice, which started when I was in my 20s and I rejected religion like most young people do. And the religion I was raised in was a Presbyterian Christian. And but it was also Christianity was the only religious tradition I really knew. So that was where I started to explore. I thought, is this the Christianity I knew of was kind of like the church I went to was kind of like fundamentalist. And so the Christianity I grew up with seemed to be for children or idiots. Anyway, I didn't get it, but I knew that God didn't create the Presbyterian Church. And so I said, there must be more to it than this. I mean, I know there are intelligent people who are Christians. How can that be? And so I started kind of exploring that, first intellectually by reading theologians. And one of them of influence was Rudolf Bultmann, who wrote Demythologizing Christianity, in which he talks about these myths are not just untrue stories. These myths are pointing to a truth, just like we speak in Buddhism about the finger pointing to the moon. It's not the moon, but it's pointing to something. And if we examine that, we might find it, we might realize it. And so along the way there, so I read a lot of books about God, how to understand God and Jesus, but still, that was very intellectual pursuit, and it helped me to allow Christianity to be a possibility. However, it didn't touch my heart. These were all concepts. And so, this will sound dramatic, but I made put aside a year of discernment, looking for a reason to live. I thought we should live intentionally with some reason, not just passively following along with the flow. But I didn't know what that was or what it could be. And I couldn't seem to just decide, like this is my purpose. So this included an exploring of Christianity and such questions as, is there a God? If so, how is this relevant to my life? What difference does it make? And so part of what I explored during that time was mystics of various traditions, including the Desert Fathers that I read from. And so this was a more intimate, personal, spiritual journey. And some of the things that helped me and influenced me was this book by Brother Lawrence, The Practice of the Presence of God, in the Practice of the Presence of God in the 17th century. And in it, one of the important things he says is, in the way of God, thoughts count for little. Love is everything. And he and others would say things like, well, you can't know God through thought or your intellect, but you can know God through love. And how does one do that? Well, this led me sort of on a pilgrimage of exploring prayer. What is prayer? And my understanding was sort of this was a way to become united with God. And many mystics have talked about that. Saint Teresa of Avila talked about stages and of contemplation. And the top one was unitive, called unitive. It was union with God. However, this idea still is looking at God a little bit like God is outside and something I'm going to attach to. And so I continued to explore, and particularly prayer. And one of the books also that helped me was The Way of the Pilgrim. This is written in the 19th century, and it's a kind of a journal of an Orthodox pilgrim who's he's going on a journey, pilgrimage, and he's wanting to learn to pray, and not only pray, but pray unceasingly, like St. Paul admonished us to do, to pray without ceasing. And how does one do that? So that was what this pilgrim is trying to, and he meets many people along the way who help him. And eventually, he takes on a prayer practice, which is sometimes referred to as the prayer of the heart. And it's like a mantra, and it is, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And you would say this all the time and try to coordinate it with your breath and your heartbeat so that it would become sort of like part of your being. So even when you were working or doing something else, the prayer would be almost going on by itself. And so I actually took up this practice, and what can happen, and also I think other people have described, is gradually you might simplify this and say, just have mercy, or eventually it came down to nothing. I wasn't saying anything. And that is also, it was a little later that I discovered Zen, but that was relevant. During this time, another book that was influential was Purity of Heart is to Will One Things by Soren Kierkegaard. It's also 19th century. And the whole book is about calling us to will one thing. And that means like intend one thing. So if you could pick just one thing that you were going to intend, what would that be? Well, it kind of came down to, in his, that the only way you could do that was to sort of will God, or God's will. I mean, that was the only thing that could be singular. And so that had a big influence on me. And after a year, well, if you're trying to prove or disprove God, many people have tried to do that, and it's pretty difficult to decide that there isn't a God or there is a God. And so, and somehow that seemed important to me, irrelevant. I mean, for some people it's not necessary, but for my spiritual journey, somehow this was an important part of it. And so after a year, I couldn't say, no, there's no God. Who am I to say there's no God? I have no idea. And God didn't intervene and show me and tell me I am here. And so, well, although there are many things that do show us that, and phrases even in the Bible, like be still and know that I am God. Or you could say, be still and know that God is. Or you could say, be still and know I am God. So all these traditions have in common this: be still, be quiet, and sort of listen with your heart and intuition and see what it tells you. So I was also assured by many of these readings and writers that some felt that you actually could know God, not just about God. And that means, and the means was prayer and love. We cannot know God by thought, but only by love. And this led to a pilgrimage of learning how to pray. And that prayer, so the end of that year was just the beginning of a new commitment. And that commitment was to kind of explore, well, who is this? Who is this God, and what difference does it make? And how do I, is it possible to know God? So this evolved a lot into realizing eventually that, God was not a concept or an object outside of me. It was a word people use, or some reality that we can know. So my prayer evolved into a quiet receptivity and surrender without words or thinking. The point was to get out of the way, to get the self out of the way and let God in. I came to believe that if a person is quiet enough, one can hear God speaking through one's heart and intuition. This is I called the practice, and Brother Lawrence called it the practice of the presence of God, also including an attitude of love, devotion, gratitude, welcoming, inviting, and opening. It was a time to savor, to cherish. It was like, I'm going to rest in this. I developed a daily prayer practice of quietly letting go of self and letting God in. I did experience an obstacle, though, and that was that it was very difficult to be physically still in order to enable my mind to be still. And that was not taught in my Christian formation by anyone. Even these mystics and desert fathers, they didn't tell me how I should embody this, how I could be quiet. And I found I was very fidgety. So I had a friend who was a Buddhist friend. He was a student of Philip Kapleau, and we were friends, and we had lots of religious discussions and things. And actually, I asked him to show me how to sit in Zazen. Now, I wouldn't have called it Zazen, but I got my cushion and my zafu, and that became my prayer posture. Now, this is still in the 70s. And actually, I did that privately before I belonged to any Sangha, probably till 1985, at the same time that I was practicing as a Christian. I was very attracted to contemplative life and monastics. And so actually in that time, late 70s, I became a Catholic, and I entered a cloistered monastery where I continued to practice Zazen on my own. Before I went, I consulted with Katagiri Roshi, about getting instructions for Zazen and also asked him if I could participate in a session. And he said, oh, yes, come on down. And the next session, I think it was 5 or 7 days. It was, and I'd been sitting maybe 20 minutes at home. And so now I was sitting all day, 35-minute periods for 5 or 7 days. I can't remember how long. It was difficult, but it was also very formative. And it was also really important to me because it was a treasure, because I was already quite committed to this, whatever this was. And I knew that if I went to the monastery, I might never have an opportunity for practicing with anyone or having any teaching. This was it. This was going to be my last Zen training before I went away to this cloistered monastery. So it was very significant. And so I went to the monastery. I better watch the time. Before I went to the monastery, I did have some conflicts already about this. Should I be really going to a Catholic monastery when I'm practicing Zazen or what, and what is this? Anyway, I wrote to 3 people. One of them was Philip Kapleau, and one of them was William Johnston, a Jesuit who was practicing Zen in France. And one was Abbot Keating. Who's written many books, including he does a lot of teaching of centering prayer. And they all answered me. And the most significant and helpful answer was actually from Roshi Kapleau, who said, let go of your confusion and, you're set on this path, go ahead and do it wholeheartedly, 100%. Don't think about it, the confusion, just do it and don't leave. Do it for at least 1 year and don't leave unless your entire body and mind says no. So that's exactly what I did. And sadly, the body and mind said no. And and some of the signs that led me to say no were my behavior in the monastery, although very noble and respected, was also unhealthy in some ways. Like I developed what they used to call in Catholicism a scrupulous conscience. So my practice became very much about me and me being right and pure and saintly. And so I was always looking for what was wrong, what I did wrong, what I should confess to. And but the main point of this was that I realized, oh, I came here to serve the community, the Christian community, and God. And what was I doing? I was going inward to the extent of being self-centered. It was all self-centered. It was about me and whether I was good enough and doing this or doing that. And I could see that was not very healthy. And I couldn't seem to change it. And so I just said, well, I guess I shouldn't be here. But when I left, I still thought that I might live in a religious community sometime, maybe that community, or maybe a community that incorporated some East and West. And actually I explored a community in Kansas called Shanti Banam, and they kind of combined Hindu yoga practice with Christianity and everything else. And the priest there was a Catholic priest, and he would wear a Jewish prayer shawl. And anyway, it's very interesting because my experience was, well, they're trying to make this friendly to all traditions, but actually, I don't know if anyone would feel, any of these people, Hindu or Jewish people, would feel comfortable in this situation where someone is sort of superficially taking on their practices. I mean, that's what it felt like a little bit to me. It didn't feel like it was really deep. And I think that can happen sometimes. When I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this, or the people there weren't very deep, but sometimes, trying to put many things together can end up with a superficial practice or superficial understanding. Anyway, so I left the monastery, and it was a very traumatic, and I felt bereft, and I didn't have a life to come back to. I was very lonely, isolated, stopped all spiritual practice, got involved in an unhealthy relationship, and had a child with this person who is wonderful. The child is 41 now, and he's wonderful. But this changed the direction of my life. Obviously, I'm not going to a monastery. I'm a mother now. Can I be 100% mother and still, practice? Can that be my practice? Anyway, it did. I eventually got married, and we had another child, and he's also wonderful. And we lived in Juneau, Alaska for almost 7 years, and there was no Zen practice there. So I continued to practice on my own. My husband even built a little prayer Zen meditation cell for me. And then I was very active in the Catholic Church there, and when I came back. But once a year, when we came to Minnesota, I would go to MCMC to participate in a session with Katagiri. So I'd pop in and I'd pop out. and I remember many of the people from that time because it was very memorable to me. And sometimes I look familiar to them, and they think that I was there as part of the community, but I was not. Anyway, so my father-in-law had Alzheimer's, and my husband decided he wanted to move back to Minnesota. So we did. And in the meantime, Katagiri had died. And after being here for about a year, I decided that maybe I should explore this third treasure, the Sangha. And so I went back to MCMC, and Shohaku Okumura was the interim teacher. And that's basically, prior to that, I wasn't really, except for a little hit and miss here and reading approaches in, I wasn't studying Buddhism. And I was actually afraid that it would negatively affect my practice if I studied too much, because I would have all these barriers of concepts and things, whereas before that, it just seemed like pretty pure sitting, And, but of course, Shohaku was a translator and a writer and a studier. And I was very attracted to him and his being, his demeanor, his portment and deportment, and his teaching. And so I decided that I actually, I stayed because of him. And after he left, I still stayed for quite a few years, and felt quite committed to that community. What was I going to say? And anyway, I continued to practice, but I kind of followed him around, would go on his retreats here and there. And eventually I was ordained and received transmission from him. And I think that transmission was in 2016 or something like that. This was a long journey. And so now I am sort of affiliated with that community from a distance. And I'm on the board there, and I have embraced his lineage and his practice. So gradually, my spiritual life merged, this Christianity and Zen, and I would spend one weekend day at the Zen Center and one weekend day at the church, and I was kind of a closet Buddhist to the Christians, and I was a closet Christian to the Buddhists, because I didn't feel confident about this being accepted. And although interestingly, the priest at my church was very supportive. He gave me a present when I first received the precepts from Shohaku, the lay precepts, and he came to my first ordination. And And he gave a sermon. I was having trouble in my marriage because of this practice and other things. And but my husband would and the kids would he would reluctantly go to church with me. And the priest, after both of those occasions, he gave me a present in front of them. You know, you go out of the church and you say hi to the priest, and he gives me a present in front of my family to acknowledge and recognize that I had just received the precepts. And he was doing this, you know, to demonstrate inclusivity and to demonstrate to my husband that it was not necessary, you know, um, to exclude this. However, we still ended up getting divorced. But anyway, the priest tried really hard. And the point is, he was with me. There was no problem, no conflict. So I didn't reject Christianity, but instead I developed a deeper appreciation and understanding. And as a Christian, I understood that our work and our practice is the manifestation of God. Our goal is to unite with the ground of being. We are already united, but we need to realize it, actualize it, and manifest it. And so this is to me the same as we are Buddha nature, and we need to realize that and actualize and manifest that. We unite with it when we realize ourselves are infinite and express ourselves as finite. This doesn't seem to be different to me than what Dogen Zenji said about Buddha nature. We have it, but we need to realize it, actualize it, and manifest it. We do the best. The best way to do this is with Zazen, but this also needs to penetrate every moment and activity of our lives. Thus, we practice in order to realize and remember we are one. So, so I'd like to just share a few words with you from this book that I showed you about the way of selflessness, about the way to enlightenment by mystics of various traditions. He says, a difference between the mystics and ordinary philosophers and theologians was that instead of trying to convince the reader of the truth of ideas through argument, the mystics insist that anyone who will undertake the appropriate spiritual discipline and practice could discover it directly for themselves. Thus, among Sufis, the mystics of Islam, seekers who reach the end of the path are called verifiers. Knowledge of the mystical states can only be had by actual experience, nor can the reason of man define it, nor arrive at any cognizing it by deduction. And the Christian in the cloud of unknowing said, you will not really understand all this until your own contemplative experience confirms it. So I see we have this intuitive inkling that draws us, and we try it, we have some faith in it, and then we do it, and the practice itself verifies that. We have to practice to awaken to the reality of one. The author makes several important points, including the spiritual practice you are undertaking are governed by 4 principles: attention, commitment, detachment, and surrender. And an important component of all these paths includes selflessness. This is the means and this is the goal. As in enlightenment and practice are one. They also talks about returning to the source, which is emptiness or nothing. He suggests that we consider surrendering to whatever our tradition provides for us. And that is the end of my talk. Any responses?
Thank you, Eido. And yes, let's see what people have to say.
What?
Let's just see what people have to
Oh,
comment on. If no one, I'll start. I remember reading, I think as in Returning to Silence, and it moved me that you had mentioned about faith earlier in your speaking, and something that struck me is Katagiri Roshi said, faith in Buddhism is having faith when your mind says, I don't have faith. So,
I don't. What?
faith in Buddhism is having faith when your mind says, I do not have faith. So,
Aha.
so that makes sense to me. That makes perfect sense because faith and doubt are kind of just kind of working
Mm-hmm.
back and forth with each other. And it took me a long time. I also, explored Christianity to some degree or another, not nearly as much as you have. However, it always kind of bugged me when I would, the last, when Jesus was kind of nailed to the cross and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's like, whoa, hang on a minute now. This isn't kind of where I want to go with all of this. So, but anyway, it took me quite a long time to understand, I think, more deeply what that meant, why he was asking that. It actually does represent, in my opinion, deep, deep faith. Because there you are at the end of your life, you're still questioning, what is this about, all this suffering? But but still, it's like you're still striving, even in that moment. That's the way I understand it now. But in my early days, I wasn't quite so gracious.
So I think it also demonstrates his humanity. And uh, we often feel that way, abandoned. And and that is a sort of part of our human condition. But also many of these people talk about not knowing, like the cloud of unknowing. Part of all of this is sort of accepting and embracing also that not knowing.
Mm, thank you. I'll also add, while no one else is speaking, that I grew up Methodist, and we had this period in our church where we sat in silent meditation.
Mm.
And it was pretty interesting to me because I kind of like this. No one's saying anything. I mean, we did it for 30 seconds. I mean, it wasn't, you know, but everyone did it for 30 seconds. So it was like, well, that was my beginning of just sitting silently. So anyway,
Even the Presbyterians didn't, they were never silent. They had long verbal prayers. And um, actually, when I was a child, I used to stop by, in those days, the Catholic churches were open to the public. And I used to sometimes stop in and just sit in the Catholic church because there somehow that quiet was allowed. It was
oh, I think we lost your video, Adol. Ado, can you turn off your video? We lost that internet connection. There, okay, okay, you're back. We lost your connection there for, at least I did. Okay. And now I'm not hearing you. I'm not hearing you.
oh,
Now I am. Okay. All right.
yes or no?
Now,
Okay. Okay. I don't know what happened, but I don't have um a mic that works in my computer, so I have this external mic. I think
oh,
it's not real reliable.
oh, okay.
Anyway, what you missed was really important, and that was I said that the Presbyterians were never quiet.
Yeah, I
And
heard.
they had long discursive prayers that lasted for many, many minutes. And so I would stop by after school and sit in the Catholic church where quiet was uh, allowed. So I said, I think I had this sort of contemplative tendency, even as a child.
Hmm.
Um, well, I'm really glad that I got to hear your talk. It's kind of mind-blowing how much you remember and how persistent you were, and very inspiring. It's good to know people that feel like you feel like you're more or less on the same level with, and hear what what we can do when we get carried away with our intentions. I just want to share my admiration, and I was taking notes throughout. I guess if there's time, I'm interested in how you're applying all of this experience and practice to your approach to the election of our next representatives in government.
You were muted for a while by accident. So is that a question, Kyoko?
I want to give everybody else a chance to say whatever they want, but if there's any time for you to just talk about, I just recently gave a talk entitled "Now What?" because I see this as a great opportunity to bumble about with our practice and see what happens, and can we bring it to bear where there's a lot of what questions, confusions, and concern.
I don't have the answer to that except to say something kind of cynical, but that is whatever happens is God's will. Excuse me. Some people would say that.
I would say it's karma.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Oh, I guess my big question about that is, well, how do we handle a reaction, a response when it doesn't turn out the way we think it should? What, as you said, what now? I mean, wow.
Yeah, yeah. I think we've been karma-ing our way to the situation we're in right now. I recently took up reading, I'm blocking on his name, but he's the guy that was in the concentration camp, Viktor Frankl. I decided I'd read Victor, just to sort of settle me down. It's kind of like inspire me in a way, because it does. I'm quite sure that it will mean an enormous change, and I have the belief that really, no matter how it turns out, it's evolving in a way that's concurrent with the karma of our country, as well as, of course, our individual karma, is the way I'm seeing it, and kind of talking to myself about being able to be applying the teachings and the practice continuously. I see Laura Gillis has a question, so let me be
I have a question for you first. What's the name of the book you're reading? Viktor Frankl.
the Viktor Frankl book.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember the title, but
Man's Search for Meaning.
it'll come up first. Huh?
Is it man's search for meaning?
Yes, exactly.
Is that you, Laura? I've seen your hand raised, and I'd wanted to call on you. So can you let's give you the
Yes.
opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. This talk was really meaningful, so thank you so, so much. A lot of parallels, actually. It's just really nice to hear that. My question is, I work as a healthcare worker as well. I'm a licensed acupuncturist, and I found even when in school, and especially when starting practice, that when you work in such an intimate space with people, intuition comes forward often when you, whether you want it to or not. And so I'm just curious, as a physical therapist for so many years, did you find that as well? I mean, you gave how you explored intuition through different faith practices. Did that appear in your professional practice as well?
I would say yes, although it might look indirect. For a while, I was struggling with, as being a full-time worker and a parent, I made this unnecessary problem that many of us do, thinking that that is not our practice and that is taking us away from our practice. And eventually I was able to embrace sort of my work and my parenting as my practice. And Shohaku said a very wise thing. He said, at this time, your Sangha are the people who need you the most, and those are your patients and your family. And I saw my work as an opportunity to connect with people. I worked in home care, so it was kind of an intimate situation where I was working with people one-to-one in their homes. And for example, one of the things that would come up, many of these were elderly people, and some were angry and resentful because they were becoming dependent. And so we would have a talk about, I would preach, about the importance of this opportunity they were giving to others to practice generosity. So I think, anyway, and I think it really helped some people. And that's just an example. I'm just saying, I think in any situation, whatever your work is, if you're encountering people, you're practicing and you have an opportunity to practice and to respond, from your heart. Even though, and the same with anybody who's working at the grocery store, whatever they're doing, it doesn't matter. And you notice this sometimes, people sometimes really respond with their heart. And we could also respond with gratitude to what they're doing, even though it's just their job, supposedly, they're giving us something. And so the more we can recognize, I think that when and be grateful when somebody is giving us something or an opportunity, or that we can encourage others to see that our frailties, our dependence, and our needs give someone else the opportunity to practice generosity. And I think that's really important. I mean, to the extent that I've encouraged people to practice this, like ask for help even when you don't need it, just to experience that interdependence and know that you're to practice interdependence, not try to be this independent, isolated person who can do everything himself, because we are not that. And the more we practice that, the more we realize that. And we can even make things up, like, I need you for such and such because I want to give you an opportunity to give. Anyway, that's my preaching.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Eido-san. And was that a satisfactory answer for you, Laura?
But
I was just asking Laura if she was okay with your answer, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
We're over our time, so that's why I'm
oh,
kind of
okay.
so thank you so much for your speaking today, Eido-san. It's very very moving, And so I'll give you the next speakers. Next week is Musho Darin. He's, I believe, a student of Onru Kennedy that works with Onru.
Yep.
Is that okay? And then Onru, after Musho is Onru Kennedy the next week, and then after that is Cato Jeremy Thoughtland. And then for the rest of this year, we have 2 retreats scheduled. One is Practicing the Way with Onru J.D. Kennedy and Patrice Kolish. It's a merging of Vipassana and Zen practice, and that begins on November 14th. And then we have Rohatsu session led by Kyoku Wayland, who's present with us today, and also Myo-O Habermas share. So those are upcoming events, and let us close with the 4 great vows.
Okay.
Yes.
And I add a little thing that's just kind of an interesting tidbit, but Musho and I received the lay precepts at the same time when Karen Suna was the head teacher at MCMC.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, there you are. So all that time, and now Musho's going to be giving a talk here at Okyochi. Isn't that how things turn out sometimes? Okay. All right. Thank you all. And beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you all, and have a wonderful week, and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.